truth to power, because all of us need to hear it, and the whole country needs to hear it. And I want to thank all of the organizers who put today together for their advocacy and for bringing us all together today. We join together to stand with Susan and to hold up Susan and to hold up Mark and to hold up Ty and to remember Tel. And we're together today to remember all in our community who have lost ones to gun violence. But I believe part of our healing is to also demand a call to action to put an end to gun violence that is taking so many precious lives and destroying so many families across our country. On November 7th of 2018, a day I think seared forever in all of our memories, 12 innocent young members of our community lost their lives at the borderline. I will never forget the confusion, the shock, and the horror when my office woke me up with the news. I'll never forget when I arrived at the scene shortly thereafter and spoke with Sheriff Dean, a man who has seen so much tragedy in his decades of service as a law enforcement officer. But he could not get through the briefing. He could not get through briefing me without having to pause every few moments to shore himself up emotionally. I will never forget walking into the fear, the shock, and the tears of the teen center. I will never forget going to the corner of Lynn and Hillcrest to watch the procession for Sergeant Helus. I wept when I saw thousands of people quietly, solemnly lining the streets to pay their respects to Sergeant Helus, as well as all of the first responders from all over the state who joined to pay their respects. I will never forget, amid all of this pain and sadness, being told that a fire was beginning to rage through Ventura County. Our first responders, I like to refer to them as our heroes and sheroes, had to help the families of borderline investigate the scene and then fight two fires. And so many families in our whole community, in shock now, had to worry about having to evacuate their homes from a raging and dangerous fire and deal with the emotions that come with fear and the loss of control. No matter where you were or what you were doing, we will never forget that night and that week. So today, almost 3 months later, we are Thousand Oaks strong, but we are also still grieving and hurting and trying to figure out the way forward. I did not return to Congress that week or the next. I only wanted to be here with my community. Had I been in DC, I would have been expected to call for a moment of silence. We would have all stood there on the House floor for a few moments, prayed, thought about those whose lives were lost, and then we would have simply carried on, leaving that moment of silence as our only act. But I'm glad I stayed home to be with the families and our first responders, because we do not want more moments of silence from our leaders in Congress. We want action, and we want it now. Just a few weeks after first being elected to Congress, Sandy Hook happened, where 20 innocent, beautiful, young children were so tragically killed. We had a moment of silence on the House floor then, but President Obama and all of my Democratic colleagues thought it would be followed by action. We were absolutely certain that this horrific tragedy would finally be the catalyst to take up legislation to address gun violence in our country. But we were wrong. And sadly, since Sandy Hook, there have been almost 2,000 more mass shootings, from San Bernardino to Pulse to Las Vegas to to Sutherland, to Parkland, to Pittsburgh, and borderline. And after each one of these senseless tragedies, we have another moment of silence without any action to move forward on common sense gun safety legislation. We, the Democrats, we held a sit-in on the House floor. We marched, we rallied, we stood up, and we spoke out, calling on Speaker Boehner and then Speaker Ryan time and again to let us vote on legislation to address gun safety. But they refused. They refused. The vast majority of the American people, Republicans, Democrats, and independents who support common sense gun reform. So it makes zero sense that Congress, who should be representing the will of the people, would not advance legislation to address it. But as we all know, the political landscape, the way districts are drawn, the influence of outside groups, which Susan described so clearly, have all made it very, very difficult. The ground, I will say, did shift ever so slightly after Parkland. We were able to get legislation through that would help improve the National Instant Criminal Background Check system to require better compliance from all the states in the United States. We passed legislation to help schools identify threats. And we finally got the Republicans in Congress to agree to allow the Center for Disease Control to research the causes of gun violence, albeit without any funding. While I appreciate Henry's encouragement, I have to say I'm a little less hopeful that the Republican-controlled Senate or the White House will work with us on significant gun violence prevention legislation. But I also believe, and I believe firmly, it is critically important for Democrats to demonstrate to the American people who are crying for action that we do have common sense solutions. And we will put forward an agenda for the American people to see, and we will fight mightily. And all of you are going to fight with us to make sure that both houses of Congress and the White House in 2020 will be a Congress and a White House that will move our country in the right direction. Research tells us that the 10 states with the weakest gun laws have a gun violence level that is more than 3 times higher than the 10 states with the strongest gun laws.
Bullshit.
So it's very important that Henry and Jackie and all the leaders here in our community, we continue to lead, to do good work on gun safety legislation. Because California, at the end of the day, sets the bar for the nation. And as California goes, so does the rest of the country. In the meantime, Democrats in the House will move on an agenda, and we will put common sense legislation on the floor. And our first priority, because it does have some Republican support, is the Bipartisan Background Check Act. This bill is H.R. 8. And it's H.R. 8. H.R. 8 was unveiled on January the 8th, the 8th anniversary of the shooting in Arizona of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords and 13 other individuals. And H.R. 8 will close the dangerous loopholes in the background check system, getting our national background check up to California standards, so that finally and nationally, fewer guns will not get into the hands of people who should not have them. Our second priority is to fully fund and make mandatory, gun violence research at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I will add that I believe H.R. 8 will be debated in committee at the end of this next week. So make no mistake, gun violence is a public health crisis and we need to treat it like one with rigorous research and analysis to guide our efforts to end it. And we stand ready to also introduce bills banning assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, and bump stocks, all of which I am a co-author. We also need to focus on the behaviors of individuals, not mental health diagnoses, because the research has shown quite clearly that past violent behavior is the best predictor of future violence. To address this issue head-on, I'm also co-authoring legislation to expand what are known as the red flag laws to block access to firearms of an individual poses a threat to themselves or others. In addition, I am a co-author of closing the so-called boyfriend loophole so that we can prevent convicted domestic abusers from accessing firearms.
Already the law.
You might know, under federal law, the courts can order guns to be taken away from domestic abusers who are spouses and who live with or share a child with their victim, but the law doesn't cover significant others that don't live together. So this needs to be changed. There are a number of policy solutions we will and we must advance. They will not stop every incident of gun violence, but to do nothing, to try nothing with the argument that it will not fix everything is simply unconscionable. If we can save one life, and I believe we can save thousands and thousands given the rate of gun violence in our country, then we must. And we will not stop until we do. An argument that is often used to derail progress is that any attempt at legislation to address gun violence is simply an attempt to undermine the Second Amendment, or the insanity of the repeated myth that I hear over and over again, that the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. None of these arguments are true, and the American people also believe that they are not true. And Susan, if you'll indulge me and Mark, I think Tal's brother Ty recently made this point beautifully. Ty said in the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, it says the right to life, to liberty, and to the pursuit of happiness. And indeed, the Declaration of Independence precedes the Second Amendment, and Tal's right to life should also precede the Second Amendment. And I think we can all agree to that. So let me close by quoting Gabby Giffords. And she made this quote 3 years after being shot in her district. And she said, "I am stronger now. I am committed to my rehab, and I am committed to my country. And my resolution, standing with the vast majority of Americans who know we can and must be safer, is to cede no ground to those who would convince us the path is too steep or we too weak. So let's get it done. Thank you all for being here."
staring at you the whole time. I swear, every time she looks up,